Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for this session of Lunch Bytes. My name is Matt Johnson. I'm an application engineer here at Ally PLM Solutions. As many of you know, Ally PLM hosts Lunch Bytes once a month to explore the capabilities, features, and functionality within the different Siemens PLM software products that we service. To maximize the value of your time during these half-hour sessions, we're going to focus on specific topics or workflows. And we welcome your suggestions for any topics you'd like for us to discuss in future sessions. Today we're going to review the fundamental concepts of the steering wheel and the live rules. And particularly we're going to look into updates that have come to these tools since ST6. By now most solid edge users have a pretty good understanding of what synchronous modeling is. But today we're going to go back to the basics as we hope to help you guys become better synchronous designers by maximizing the use of these very fundamental tools. We're going to focus primarily on pointing out the new functionality that came in ST6, but we're also going to talk about the foundation of how these tools are used, and then look at the enhancements along the way. And we're going to do most of this through a demonstration after we go through some slides here today. To avoid audio feedback, you've all been placed in a listen-only mode. This is just to prevent distractions from hosting a teleconference like this. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to follow up with you after today's session. So please email us or get in touch with us, and we'll get back with you just as soon as possible. So let's get started. We're going to talk just basically with overview and review. What are these tools? Why do I keep saying they're fundamental or foundational to synchronous edit? We're going to talk specifically about the steering wheel, and we're going to make note of what has changed from ST5 and previous to what's new in ST6. Specifically, you'll see that we now have a third axis on the steering wheel. That's going to be the primary focus, but there's a lot of extra enhancement that comes along with just the way that the tool works for us. We're going to talk about live rules, how that's changed from ST5 to ST6, what are the updates here. And as a subset of live rules, we're going to talk specifically about the solution manager. The solution manager is going to add intelligence to the way we make synchronous edits by giving us a color legend that allows us to see what faces in our model are involved in the solution that's taking place. And then we'll finish all this out with a demonstration. So to overview the steering wheel and live rules, if you've done any synchronous modeling, you'll understand that it's going to be very fundamental to what we do for part editing. When we select a face, the steering wheel is exposed, and we use that to manipulate the face. But often very overlooked is the fact that the steering wheel is also fundamental to assembly environments, because it becomes called our assembly steering wheel, but it's actually the component select and move tool. The steering wheel allows us to select faces and edit and or move the geometry, where live rules is the tool or the technology under the hood that actually infers the geometric or the design intent. And you'll be able to see this more in examples if you haven't had much experience with it in the past. And then next, what we'd like to look at, let me get the slide back up, I apologize, is the solution manager. So if the steering wheel is what we use to make edits and move geometry, and live rules is what infers the geometric or the design intent, solution manager is then the enforcer of the live rules. And more so than the enforcer of the live rules, I like to look at it as our conflict mediator. It allows us to see what conflicts might take place or what faces might be involved that we don't intend, and we can use that to visually resolve those conflicts and have full confidence in the edits we're going to make. So all of these tools were enhanced in ST6, and one of the minor enhancements, which is actually very helpful for just the user interface as a whole, is the fact that the steering wheel and these other commands have been added to the command finder. So you can always add those and take a look. So ST5 and prior, we had a steering wheel that looked much like this. And what we want to agree on before we move forward are some basic terms. That we had a primary and a secondary axis. So the largest being the primary, the smallest being the secondary, and a torus. Within the torus is what the blue plane, we call it the tool plane, and in the center of that is our origin of the steering wheel. And then we have cardinal points, or what we call knobs. So we can use those to manipulate the steering wheel and its orientation. We had to do that quite a bit when we needed to reorient the steering wheel. In ST6, we've grown the steering wheel to be 3 full, what look like primary axes. The major benefit that I find is that I no longer need to toggle the tool plane as much to change the axis of the desired edit. So with the addition of the third axis, you'll find that it's much easier to use and it's more consistent to use throughout your modeling, that you don't have to manipulate it as much. The fact that all 3 axes are the same length kind of infers that they're all a primary axis and they can all very much be used as the primary axis. Now you'll see that if you use Quick Pick, we still identify them as a primary and a secondary, but they all act very much as a primary axis. Along with the change to the steering wheel itself is the way that the steering wheel aligns, and I'm going to populate these slides pretty quick so that we can see these images. In ST5 and prior, the steering wheel would snap to the midpoint and the primary axis would be aligned with the axis of a circle. In ST6, what we're going to do that actually has a better desired intent, I find, as a user, is that the torus is going to be parallel to the face. Notice I have an asterisk here in the slide and it says when we position the steering wheel, the torus will be parallel. The caveat here is if we don't lock the alignment. And locking the alignment of the steering wheel, I believe, is a function that's often forgotten about or underused. And just be reminded that if you hold the shift key when you move the origin of the steering wheel, it'll preserve the alignment. And I'll show you that in an example here in a moment that really allows us to utilize this tool a lot more robustly and make the design intent that we make without drawing additional sketches and so forth. So the intent of that makes it a lot more visually appealing and actually puts the steering wheel where it intends. The other thing that's been enhanced is how we adjust the bearing knobs. We've always been able to shift select or control select a bearing knob and rotate about an axis, but if you didn't know it and use it a lot, I found personally it ended up being a little trial and error. What you're going to find now is that if you shift select and pick a bearing knob, as you can see here on the left, the axis highlights that we're going to rotate about. In the very same orientation, if we were to select the control key and select that bearing knob, the other axis highlights and then we would be rotating about that. So just more visual cues on what we're getting ready to do when we manipulate the steering wheel. And this is for positioning the steering wheel. After we've selected a face or set of faces, where are we going to position the steering wheel to begin to make our edit? Shift click on the tool plane still allows us to rotate the steering wheel, but we changed the way this works. It used to just be a toggle between the primary and the secondary axis. And what we do now is we're going to rotate, as you see here, counterclockwise about X and then counterclockwise about Z. What that really does is just facilitate a rotation that if you click it 3 times, shift click the tool plane, you'll return to your origin. So down here at the bottom you can see that I exposed a series of 3 clicks that brings you back to the home position. One of the minor improvements that gets big feedback is the ability to change the size of the steering wheel. By default, it's going to be medium. You'll see for the sake of the example today, I've made mine large so that it's visually appealing. Some people like that to have better access to it. Some people like to see their models better and like to have the small steering wheel. So feel free to change that back and forth and see what best suits your design and how your mind's eye picks that up in terms of how it fits with your modeling. Prompt bar feedback's been greatly improved. During the positioning or the using of the steering wheel, if you were to hover over the torus, the steering wheel is going to tell us that you can rotate the steering wheel. If you were to select or hover over one of the axes, it's going to tell us that you can shift click to move it or just click to move along that axis. And then same thing with the tool plane. It tells us if we shift click, we reorient the steering plane, or if we click it, we're going to move. And be reminded that clicking the tool plane enables a 2D move, and I'll show you that in the demo. So sometimes we go to move a hole and we move it in the X and then we move it in the Y. And that's needed if you need a key in a hard number. But if you're moving it to a key point, remember that we can select the tool plane and facilitate a 2D move in that plane. So all these are kind of minor but really major usability enhancements. I think if you'll agree that you'll find this much more usable. Key point locate is one of those things that makes it so much nicer. In the past, we didn't have the ability to specify a key point. They were all exposed to us. So in ST6, we now have the ability, when we want to position the steering wheel, to limit the select set of our key points. So if you wanted specifically to pick a center point or an end point, and you've got additional geometry in the background that quick pick might pick up, this is a great way to limit that and make it easier to select. Now you can always override the key points using, what we've called in the past the mice, midpoint, intersection, center, and end point. But doing that, we need to hit K on the keyboard, and what that does is turn on the explicit location, and it changes. We don't have intersection anymore, but we get silhouette point. So what we're able to do is to pick the midpoint or the end point or so forth. Now we call this a snap point. This is independent of the setting we saw in the previous slide. This does not override that filter, but doesn't change the filter, but just allows us at that instance to pick the new key point. The snap point is what we're going to call it. Another nice feature is if you start to reposition the steering wheel, and as you're placing it, you realize you didn't mean to move it, or you want to put it back to where it was, a right mouse button anywhere in the graphic window will release the edit and put the steering wheel right back where it was. And we're going to step through each of these edits in just a moment, actually right here, so it's a good time to do that. I've got the slides here that I'm going to basically just go back to the beginning with, and we'll toggle over to a model and just look at what is the steering wheel and how can we use these new enhancements. So let's start with just what I said about the command finder. When you get back to the office, if you want to know more about the steering wheel, if you enter steering wheel into the command finder, you'll get both the 2D and the 3D. You'll find most information about the steering wheel in the overview. And just to point out, the help file in ST6 is now web-based. You can also change the settings and make it local. But you can see you can thumb through here and find a lot of the information on how to manipulate and use the steering wheel. So don't be afraid to use the command finder to remind yourself of how to use these tools appropriately. I talked about using this shift move to preserve the origin. If I were to place this hole somewhere else, and here's an additional, I talked about using the 2D move. If I click this plane, I can move this hole anywhere on 2D relative. If I want to now move this hole in a vector that is parallel to this canted face, we'd have to pick the hole and then rotate the steering wheel to something that would be parallel to it. What we're able to do is to select the feature or features we want to move, reposition the steering wheel. It by default is going to snap to this face. If I were to hold shift now while I click the origin, I'm moving the origin back to this hole, but it's preserved its orientation. And so now I can move this hole parallel to that canted face, which would be the design intent of this particular edit. But now also note that if I were to select this feature and move the steering wheel to any hole, that the torus then becomes parallel to that face. And you'll find that most of the time when you make an edit, that's the intent, that you either want to move parallel to the face or along its axis. So there's three of the things that we talked about. And just for relativity of this steering wheel size, here's the large size. Note that the steering wheel size doesn't change based on your zoom. The steering wheel stays the same. But to give us a point of reference to the model, I won't zoom back out on the model, but I will change the option just so you can see the difference between large and small. So under View tab, we're going to go to the small steering wheel. Oops. And now if I select this face, you'll see how small the steering wheel is relative to what it was before. So for the sake of the demo, I'm going to make mine large so it's easier for you all to see. and we'll move on with some of the other things that we talked about. So we talked about how the knobs allow us to preview the axis we're going to rotate about. If I want to rotate, around, perpendicular to the torus per se, if I hold down the shift key, I'm actually going to rotate about the torus. If I hold down the control key, it looks like, oh, now I'm going to rotate, perpendicular to the torus. So without trial and error, I'm able to hold down the key and get a visual feedback on which way I'm getting ready to rotate. Shift tells me I'm going to rotate about this axis. Again, right mouse button will take us back if we begin to make an edit. So if I were to position this guy here, and in the midst of an edit realize I want to go back, right mouse button snaps me right back there. I haven't clicked a key point yet, so right mouse button will take me back to where I started. And then those cardinal points are very helpful to remember. Shift and click on the tool plane just to show you the rotation here. 1, 2, 3 clicks takes us back to where we started. So one click basically inverts it, again inverts it the other vector, and then brings us back to the home position. The prompt bar will also give us feedback, bring the steering wheel back. And note that if I just, my prompt bar doesn't show anything right now, but if I hover over the torus, the prompt bar tells us that I can click to rotate, or I can shift click to move the steering wheel. Same thing with each of the axes and with the knobs. So the prompt bar is giving us more direct feedback. And then for placement, if I want to place this guy, and I really only want to try to pick the midpoint here, we can limit our select set to only give me the midpoint. But inversely, if I had midpoints turned off and only had endpoints and I'm trying to pick this midpoint, what I can do is hit K for explicit selection, and now I can hit M point here, M for midpoint, and it allows me to select that even though my select filter had midpoints turned off. So, play with your select set as you need. I want to make sure I've covered everything we talked about. I did do the right mouse button. That one's pretty important. But the one thing I like to show is that, two things that you had prior to ST6, but just be reminded of. You can make an XY move by clicking either the axes, but the tool plane allows the 2D move. And then the other type of move that's important is how do I parallel a vector. Move the steering wheel to a face so that it inherits the vector, and then by holding the shift key we're going to lock the orientation, and then we can move the steering wheel back to an origin. Now you don't have to move it back to an origin, but sometimes people like to know their starting point, and now you can move parallel to some other geometry in your model. So that's kind of a real quick review of the steering wheel and its enhancements. I know we've taken a good chunk of our time, but let's go ahead and jump back over and look at what's new in the solution manager, which is a part of live rules. I'm going to expose these slides pretty quick so we can get to the demo. What we have now is a new options box that allows us to see the legend. There's a new legend in Solution Manager where we're going to color the faces, and we're going to tell you what each of those colors means. It's very intuitive and heads up. If you click anywhere on the legend when it's exposed during the Solution Manager, it'll show the options again. So you can get to the options either from Live Rules itself or from Solution Manager. Solution Manager will display mirror planes and center planes. I really like this option as a way to interrogate models and understand what type of geometric intent is being honored and why. I'd like to show you how you do this, because if you're not hovering over the live rule itself, you won't understand how to expose these planes. But I'm going to spend a little bit of time and show you a few edits and how this works. Solution Manager is also going to show axis for coplanar by axis, and there's some enhancements that have been made to coplanar by axis that we're going to talk about. But there's also additional ways to invoke or remove the honoring of different relationships. You can right-click on a face during the Solution Manager, and you can disable a live rule. And in this case, coplanar relationship, we're going to tell it to ignore this plane of coplanar relationships. Or you can also hover over that and say, don't ignore this entire plane, but ignore this particular instance of the plane. This is actually more easily accomplished by just left mouse button clicking on the face, and I'll show you that in this demo as well. It'll make a lot more sense. Solution Manager is going to limit the dimensions that are exposed to you. It's only going to show you the PMI dimensions now that your edit has effect of. So when you first select the face, all the PMIs are exposed. But as soon as you go into the Solution Manager, it's going to hide everything that's not driving or having an effect on the edit that you're going to be making. And then note that just a reminder that we still have the option to relax dimensions and relax relationships. Again, relaxing says, okay, I know it's a driving dimension, but I do intend to make a change. After the change takes place, go ahead and relock that dimension. So Auto Solution Manager can be turned on if you'd like to always take place during an edit. I personally don't like it always on. If it's on, the way that it enters solution mode is based on whether the feature fails or not. So in this particular instance, the move is failing, but there's no particular relationship that's being found that's causing it to fail. So we're not going to take you into the Solution Manager mode because there's no relationship that you could use to turn off in Solution Manager. Now, if a relationship is found that's causing a conflict, it makes sense to automatically be put in Solution Manager so you can then therefore turn off those conflicts. Persisted relationships and grounded relationships will now be restored as if they were a relaxed dimension. So if you intentionally edit a grounded face, it'll become regrounded again. In ST5, we deleted those relationships, so we're going to still honor those for you. And now horizontal and vertical relationships are going to be exposed through Solution Manager. So sometimes we get things like, for example, these horizontal vertical relationships that don't show up as a live rule, but they're a rigid relationship, persisted relationship, I should say, that we need to manage during the edit of our part. So we'll take a look at that here in just a moment as well. Now, we gave up in ST6 coplanar by axis, and that was by design. Development and planning determined that we had no way to control a canted axis. And the custom axis wasn't used very much. So if we have an axis like the face on the seat that isn't one of our planes, we had no way to lock the orientation of coplanar by axis. So now coplanar by axis also has canted coplanar by axis, and we'll honor those holes as being coplanar the way that we would intend for them to be. The whole lock if possible in ST5, if you remember the way that we treated radii and straight faces, we said, keep orthogonal to base if possible. This was actually backported to ST5 Maintenance Pack 2 because we realized it wasn't the design intent. So now orthogonal is truly an on or off setting. If it's on, you will be kept orthogonal. We're not going to violate that. If off, it's going to revert to the if possible setting. So the chances are very unlikely that you're ever going to get a situation like this part in the middle, that's labeled ST5. If that bottom dimension is 100 and you move the center hole, the radius has the relationship of concentricity and tangency, but it's very unlikely that you intend to tip that face. So we're going to honor that. And here's another slide that basically says, hey, if you turn it off, then it's going to act like if possible. And like I said, this was backported to ST5 Maintenance Pack 2, so you'll see that same type of behavior. So we're running a little short on time. Let me bounce right in here and take a look at some of these things we've talked about. The first thing we want to talk about is, what is this Solution Manager? Well, Solution Manager replaces what back in ST3 and ST4 was called Advanced Live Rules. Here's the options we talked about. If I open the options, it's basically the ability to change the colors for the Solution Manager. And do we want to see the legend? If I hover over a color, do I want to see what it represents? And these are the legends. Here's what's going to be told to us when we hover over these colors. Now, you can turn on Auto Solution Manager by checking the checkbox here. And whenever you try to make an edit, Solution Manager is going to take place if it needs to, right before the solve. So this is Solution Manager. It's telling me what's getting ready to happen. And I have to OK this move every time. So I don't particularly like to have that turned on all the time, because I can, if I want, make this same edit, but I can come down here and pick the solution manager and get the same effect if I want to check it out. But notice the quick key here. You can also verify this by hitting quick key on the keyboard. It tells us V. And I like to think about this as V as verification. I want to verify my edit here. So if I select this face and begin to make an edit, I want to verify what's happening to my model. I'm going to hit V on the keyboard. It takes me into Solution Manager. So while we're in this edit, let's take a look at these colors. Note that anything that's in this white color is not going to be affected by this edit. So we don't have to worry about it. The things that are green, it tells us was the face that we started with. The things that are blue are the things that, hey, these are being solved correctly, and we're going to modify those. So let's bounce out of that and look at the other abilities to do this. Solution Manager will display the mirror plane, and it'll also display the center plane for us. So we're moving this, and obviously symmetry is being honored in this part, but where is it being honored? Well, you have to go into Solution Manager, so I'm hitting V for verification, but I don't see any planes here. Well, what you have to do is look at your live rules. Which live rules are being solved? In this case, I do have symmetry. I have symmetry about the ZX, and if I hover over the ZX live rule, note that I now get a plane that tells me, oh, okay, I am symmetric about the center of this part. Likewise, I have some concentric relationships here. Concentricity is being honored between the hole and the outside radius. And then there's this other relationship that's being solved for it. I'm not really sure what that is, but if I highlight it, it tells me that this face cannot move because it's locked to the base reference plane. So as you begin to make edits, you can see what's being affected. Also note that the tangent relationship is going to wrap all the way around this part. So you can now quickly get a better feel for what type of edits are happening to your part based on going into the Solution Manager. And I think you'll find it a lot more, I'm going to say, comforting. A lot of users have said, hey, I want to make sure I know what's happening to the faces of my part, and so on and so forth. Note that if I select this top face, I'm going to add some dimensions to it so that we can actually drive this model and prove our design intent. This particular dimension is going to stay as a locked dimension. So I'm going to lock this dimension. But also for the sake of just showing how the command works, if I add some other unlocked dimensions on here, and I'm going to put a couple on here so that it's actually kind of cluttered. Get over here and pick this back face. So if I turn off all my PMI, but I select this face to make an edit, PMI will always expose all of these dimensions, but they may not all affect the edit I'm getting ready to make. So if I begin to make this edit and I go into Solution Manager by hitting V, note that I'm only going to be shown the dimensions that potentially have effect over this. Well, since this is a driving dimension, it affects this. Now, all these top faces are being honored because it's a coplanar relationship. All these bottom faces are being honored because they're a coplanar relationship. If I do not want these bottom faces to come along for this coplanar ride, I can turn off this coplanar. Now, this first face will always come because of this hard dimension. But if I hover over here and right-click, I'm exposed with the coplanar relationship. I'm going to toggle that off by selecting it. And you can see now that I've pushed that out of the select set. That particular coplanar relationship now is not being honored. Anything that's in line with that plane is now not being honored. I'm going to go back into Solution Manager. I'm going to turn that back on, picking the same plane and turning it back on. So if I leave the verification now and begin to make the edit, you'll see that now that's being honored the way that I intended. I'm hitting V to toggle back and forth to Solution Manager. The other option is to right mouse click, hover and wait, and then we're exposed with this single face. So I'm going to left click on this face, and I'm also going to come over here and do the same thing here. I'm going to hover and wait, and I'm going to tell it to ignore that face as well. I've just pushed those two faces out of the solve, but not the entire plane. So now I can continue to make my edit and note just that just those two faces have been pushed out of that coplanar relationship solve. I think I'm going to escape out of this edit because I don't want to honor that relationship. But what I do want to do is exactly what I just did, but instead of using that right-click, left-click method, one thing I really like, it's very intuitive in ST6, is you go into this solution manager, verification mode, and simply using your left mouse button, I can say, look, all these blue faces are being solved for. If I select any face, I am pushing it out of the solve. Don't solve this face. Don't solve this face. Don't move this face. Don't move this face. So I want to keep this geometry as it is, but I need the rest of this pattern to kind of work, as if it's a coplanar relationship. So now I leave the verification mode and I begin to make my edit, but very intuitively I was saying make my edit, but don't include these faces. So again, solution manager and left click says, hey, get out of the select set or get back in the select set. So we'll just do this one more time for the sake of example. Get out of the select set by selecting it. And notice now it's red. So my legend will tell me that a red face has been isolated. It's not going to be solved during the operation. So I can click it again, left click, will bring it back into the solve. Very intuitive, just in the nature of the way we work. I want to show you that since we have this canted coplanar relationship, now I'm not coplanar, coplanar by axis, if I select one of these holes now, and I begin to make an edit, I want you to note that in my live rules, this particular icon is being highlighted. This is canted coplanar axis. So if we go back into Solution Manager, I'm hitting V on the keyboard, and I want to see what is a canted coplanar axis. Well, if I highlight it, it tells me, hey, here's a coplanar axis that's not, parallel to any of my primary axes. You can also see that there's some symmetry here, right? And then there's the coplanar axis that happens to be on this canted axis. So I believe that's the most of what we talked about. One thing that isn't usually visible for us to see, though, are horizontal vertical relationships. If you have relationships in your Pathfinder, and we'll create one real quick. I'm going to say let's create a horizontal vertical relationship between the midpoint here and the midpoint here. We didn't want to come down. We wanted to do that as a vertical relationship. Let me move this guy back over. You'll see that it affects other things in the model which aren't intended when that geometry is being affected. I'm waiting for my glyph here to say midpoint. There we go. So now you'll see I've got this vertical relationship, and I'm going to accept that. And so now I have a relationship in my Pathfinder, and we call that a persisted relationship, obviously. But sometimes we don't see that. So if I were to begin to make this synchronous edit on this face, you'll see, hey, this hole is kind of, just being stuck here. Or if I were to select this hole, which would be maybe more of an intuitive move, and I begin to move the hole, well, now the face is going to move, and that's kind of confusing. Why is that hole coming along for the ride on the face? Or like I say, if we were to select the face, this might be more of an intuitive move. If we just move it this way, we'll see that the hole would move if it were locked down. So it's causing the edits to not act the way we intend them to. So let's go ahead and select this face and get back into Solution Manager and look for this. So I'm going to hit V for verification. I'm going to hover over this face and right-click. Hey, look, these are the two relationships that are being honored, right? I've got symmetry about the midplane, and I've got, oh, here's the horizontal vertical relationship, which is causing this to act this way. I'm going to select that and turn it off. I do not want to honor that in this particular case. So now we've turned off that edit. The black face, here's a black color. If we were to look at our Solution Manager, it's going to tell us that that is a grounded face and we can't edit it. But now if I were to select this hole again and make this edit, now that ramp should not be affected. I did not turn that off the way I intended to. We can turn that off Let's go ahead and get in solution manager mode here. Okay, so now we can turn that guy off. Now these are red, they've been pushed out of the select set. So now I can move the hole without affecting that ramp. So all these new visual cues are going to tell us, hey, what are we doing to the model? How does it affect it? If I select the hole and begin to make a move, yeah, I get some, parallel, symmetric, tangency things. But, what else could be happening to my model? And quickly, we're able to look at this model and say, all of this is safe. If it's transparent, there's nothing happening to it. We don't have to worry about the integrity of our model. This is all that's being affected by our edit. So that really takes us through what's new in ST6 with live rules and solution manager. I hope you found it helpful today. There's a few things I'd like to leave you with as a reminder. And the first is going to be that we created a mouse pad that we gave out at ST6. If you come to training or to any live events, we'd love to give you a mouse pad that we think will help you become a better synchronous editor. We put our live rules on there, and we put the edits to the steering wheel. If you'd like one of these, give us a call. We need to cover shipping costs, or if you come to a live event, we'd be happy to give you one. Next live event that we'd love to see you at would obviously be training here at Ally, but as a larger event for the community, we'd love to see you at Solid Edge University. Solid Edge University this year will be held in Atlanta. So you can find information on our website, and you can register by following the link there. And you can find the replay of today's event on our website. So you can go check that out and also register for the next Solid Edge LunchByte. And I've made a big note down here at the bottom just to talk to you folks that have control over the seats and the licensing you have. We've got a promotion running right now for expired maintenance. If you need new seats of Solid Edge and you've got expired maintenance, there's a great promotion right now to get current and or to trade in the expired maintenance for new software. So if you've got new employees or new needs for packages of software, give us a call. We'd love to get you in touch with one of our salespeople to talk about how you could take advantage of that and save some money. So I'm going to leave you with my contact information. Again, my name is Matt Johnson. I appreciate you joining us today. I hope you found the information helpful. If you have questions, comments, or you're trying some of these tips and can't seem to get them to work, feel free to call me directly or shoot me an email, and we'll be happy to get back with you just as quickly as possible. Thanks for your time today, guys. Have a good one.